Hey, how's it going everyone? Here is another how to build video for you today. This time, we will be talking about Ken. Since his rework 2 months ago, there's been a big improvement in his skills, and he can be a great addition to your team if you have him. He can offer both offensive and defensive debuffs to your team. His skill set comprises of both defense break and attack down, which is vital in all fights, especially in boss stages. Because of this, you can use him anywhere as a main defense breaker, which makes him a versatile unit, and also his scaling makes him a very beefy character. Unlike many characters, Ken revolves around gaining fighting spirit. When his bar is full, he can then activate his ulti, which improves his other skills. To gain fighting spirit, you have to use skills, and each skill may give out a different amount. Some may not give at all. This varies with each character that uses this system. In Ken's case, you can gain fighting spirit by attacking enemies using his first skill. With this in mind, let's have a look through his skills and see what he can do. Ken's first skill, Knockout, has a 35% chance to decrease defense for 2 turns. Unfortunately though, the skill Enhance does not increase the hit chance, so it's pretty much fixed at 35%. It is very low for someone that you would use as a main defense breaker, but hold your horses. There's still more to come. When Ken is buffed with Vigor, a unique buff specifically made for him will grant an extra effect to this skill. There's a chance of burning the target for 2 turns. Damage from this skill scales proportional to Ken's max HP. So the more HP he has, the more damage this skill will do. However, I would not recommend relying on this skill for defense break, since his next skill, Celestial Kick, can also apply defense break at a higher chance of 75%. In addition, this skill also increases Ken's speed for 2 turns. This is a better skill to use if you want to apply defense break. When you defeat an enemy using this skill, he will gain a tremendous amount of fighting spirit of 40. That's nearly half of the required spirit to use his S3. Also, you have to be very careful when to use this skill though. You can either use it early to apply defense break to the enemy, or use it as a finishing skill to gain more fighting spirit. This depends on what you need the most and the current situation. Like his first skill, damage also is proportional to his max HP. Using this skill does not gain any fighting spirit, leaving only S1 as a constant source of spirit. When Ken has Vigor, effect resistance is ignored. This guarantees his defense break to hit, and is the reason why Ken can be used in most runs. You can also use 20 Soul Burn to get another turn, which has many uses depending on what you want to do. I'll talk more about this later on. Ken's third skill, Phoenix Flurry, is Ken's bread and butter in my opinion. It consumes 100 fighting spirit to deal damage, stuns for 1 turn, and applies Vigor to Ken for 4 turns. When he is awakened 3 times, it also decreases attack for 2 turns. Even with the amount of effects granted from this skill alone, it does have a high cost, and farming fighting spirit isn't that easy, with only S1 that lets him gain 15 for each use, and a tight condition on S2 to gain 40. It also has 2 passive skills embedded in his S3. He gains 50 fighting spirit at the start of the run, and gains 5 every time he gets attacked. This skill does have a long cooldown at 6 turns, but this is not a big problem for Ken, since it takes quite a while to build up his fighting spirit. Also, the extra turn from his S2 will help further decrease the skill's cooldown. Now, all of Ken's skills revolve around Vigor, which I haven't really explained. Vigor is a unique buff that increases Ken's attack and defense. What's good about this buff is that it's separate from both attack and defense buff, which means you can have all 3: Vigor, attack, and defense buff on Ken. This in itself makes Ken strong, even with health-focused builds. Furthermore, this buff cannot be dispelled, so you will always have this active for 4 turns. This is long enough to use his S2 twice before Vigor disappears. For skill enhance, in my opinion, you don't really need to invest on any of his skills. He does have a -1 cooldown on S3 at +3 enhance, but it doesn't really change much for Ken. Since it takes a few turns to gather enough fighting spirit, by the time he has enough, his S3 should be up already. But if you do want to increase the usage of his S3 efficiently, then you can get his S3 to +3 for the -1 cooldown decrease, as well as S1 to +3. This gives him an additional 5 fighting spirit each time he uses S1. Now what I'm trying to say here is, if you want the turn decrease on his S3, you will need to get the extra 5 fighting spirit on his S1 to even it out. I mean, if you think about it, each S1 will now give him 20 spirit. That gives him 5 turns to reach 100, which means it matches the new cooldown of his S3. If Ken gets stunned and doesn't get to use his S1, then at least you have 40 spirit on S2, which is equivalent to 2 S1s in terms of spirit gain. It works, but not important. For gears, Ken will benefit a lot from HP set due to his skill scaling. There are many combinations that you can use, and in my opinion, he is one of the most versatile characters in game when gearing. An example build for Ken would be Lifesteal HP, which I personally use at the moment. Rage set is also good since all his skills can inflict a debuff: Defense Break and Burn from S1, Defense Break from S2, and Attack Down as well as Stun on S3. Health set is very good since his skills scales on his HP. Other builds you can use are Attack Crit for a more offensive build or Counter HP for a frontline tanky build. You should stay away from Unity though. Even with the thought of Unity being good on Ken to apply Defense Break on his skill as well as Fighting Spirit, the problem here is the lack of artifact support for dual attacks. Specifically for warrior class units, makes it very difficult to pull off. There is an artifact, Infinity Basket, that can increase dual attacks for all allies, but the problem is that you will need a ranger class unit to equip it, limiting your team composition. It's just not worth the effort. Because of how versatile Ken can be, it's difficult to find a fixed build set, so I would look at the substat that goes with it instead. The substats on your gears will influence what kind of build you would go for. It's a matter of pairing. For example, a Bruiser Ken would need HP percentage, crit chance, speed, and attack percentage, while a frontline Ken would need HP percentage, defense percentage, speed, effectiveness, or effect resistance. All in all, as long as you have a good amount of HP percentage on his gears, it will work, considering this gives him more survivability and increased damage on his skills. Now when deciding which artifacts to use, the ones that benefits Ken the most are those that involve his HP. 5-star artifacts such as Sigurd's Scythe and Durandal are prime examples that he can use. Sigurd increases his attack by 25% when his HP is less than 50%, and 25% of the damage is converted as health up to 50% at max. Since Ken's skills works well with HP, you're most likely building him with tons of HP. This makes him unlikely to die from heavy attacks, giving him time to heal back from this artifact's effect. Pair this with Lifesteal and Crit set, the difference will be much higher. Durandal increases Ken's combat readiness by 8%, up to 16% when his HP is less than 75%, and this triggers every time he gets attacked. This is good for Ken users that are using him in the front line or if you don't have enough speed. This is a very good artifact for those who prefer a tanky build. For 4-star artifacts, El's Fist is a good candidate. since it increases the attack and speed of Ken the less HP he has. This should be no problem for Ken when pairing with high HP gears. Hellcutter is also a good artifact, but less of a priority since it increases attack and crit chance whenever a turn ends. This is more catered towards an offensive unit, but I don't think Ken fits that role. If you are a new player and don't have any of these artifacts, you can equip either Joker or Axe as a temporary artifact. This should give a little damage boost to Ken during the early stages of progression. Ken's skill set are all powerful and complements well with each other. He is a solid defense breaker unit and is versatile in many aspects. In one aspect, he can be geared in multiple ways that suits his team. He can be a strong DPS focusing on damage and applying defense break to a bruiser unit that has both high damage and health, to a full tanky build using HP, defense and counter sets. This is only made possible due to Ken's scaling based on HP and his unique Vigor buff, which gives him both damage and defense. Also, Ken's extra turn on S2 when using Soulburn has many uses, and it depends on the current situation. One way is to use his S2 and follow it up with S1 when Ken has Vigor. This applies both a defense break and burn on the target. Another way is to use S2 to kill the target, gain 40 spirit, and then use S1 to gain a total of 55 fighting spirit, 60 if skill enhanced 3 times, so you can use S3 on the next turn. This is good if you really need Ken to apply attack down on the target. Even when Ken has low fighting spirit and has no vigor, you can use S2 then S1 to try and apply defense break. If you miss applying defense break on S2, at least there's still a chance you will apply it on his S1. However, I would only use this when you have no other choice and need to apply defense break on the target as soon as possible. Since he gains 5 fighting spirit for each hit suffered, he can be used in the front line with a tanky build. You can use Ken in most PvE contents and is a solid defense breaker for your team. Even when he has the elemental disadvantage, you can still apply defense break from S2 when Ken has Vigor. Ken in PvP doesn't work with teams that goes for quick kills, but works well with high sustain teams. He becomes a problem when he has enough fighting spirit to use S3. This is because he can also stun the target for 1 turn. He does gain 50 spirit at the start of the battle, so it's not all that bad. He can be pretty annoying fighting against since you will be focusing on more priority targets, and if you leave Ken alone, once he uses his S3, it will be quite difficult dealing with him. And that's all I have for my build guide on Ken. Personally, he is one of the interesting units in game because of his skill set and the versatility of Ken as a whole. Thanks for watching. If this was helpful to you, leave a like. If you want to see more future contents, subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. Rover out.